All Things Conceivable, a Surrogacy Podcast with Nazca Fontes.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to All Things Conceivable. My name is Nazca, and today we are diving into a topic that's deeply important for many, including our intended parents and surrogates here at ConceiveAbilities. But it's a heavy topic, and the topic is perinatal loss. While many paths to parenthood lead to pure joy, some include moments of unexpected heartbreak. So joining us today to explore the topic in detail is our very own Kristy Miller. Kristy is a mental health professional on the ConceiveAbilities Match Experience team, and who is certified in perinatal mental health, and is also a member of the Pregnancy Loss and Infant Death Alliance. To this conversation today, Kristy brings her professional training and personal passion for helping others through the emotional complexities of surrogacy. She's going to be sharing her insights from her experience at the International Perinatal Bereavement Conference earlier this year, and reflect on how her certification equips to help support surrogates and intended parents through the toughest moments, specifically those that are centered around a failed embryo transfer and an unfortunate pregnancy loss. With her unique blend of experience and compassion, Kristy guides individuals through grief, recovery, and helps them find strength to continue a surrogacy journey. In this episode today, we're going to explore the importance of open communication, emotional support, and how to navigate the deeply personal and unique dynamics of loss in surrogacy. Whew, Kristy, that is a lot. Welcome to today's episode and helping us get through all of that together.
Thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here.
Well, Kristy, as you well know, you have been an important part of this team for quite a while, and we are absolutely proud to have you and the rest of the team of surrogacy experts helping to support our families and surrogates. And it is just a privilege to partner with you shoulder to shoulder to make this happen. So since we are recording this episode in October, which is Pregnancy and Infant Loss Awareness Month, I knew that I wanted to share this important topic with listeners and have your particular brand of expertise helping to guide the conversation. So let's get started. Before we dive into some of the thornier and more emotional parts of this topic of perinatal loss, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit more about you and your role in surrogacy, and then we'll get into the mental health piece.
Yes, absolutely. So I'm Kristy. As you mentioned, I am part of our mental health team here at ConceiveAbilities, and I am licensed in social work. So my professional background spans the past 10 plus years with different experiences in the field. And I have become certified in perinatal mental health, which I think is particularly applicable to so many experiences that our surrogates and intended parents have as they're coming into these journeys. And on the mental health team, I get to work alongside other staff to help support that emotional side of things that our intended parents and surrogates are going through. So it's very meaningful work. I truly enjoy it. And I am so excited to talk a little bit more about some of the tougher aspects of that too, because I think it's important for everyone to know coming into this process that we're prepared to help them through anything that may come up and that they're not alone through that.
And one of those tougher aspects is, of course, loss and, not getting to the goal that everybody hopes to get to, or having obstacles along the way to that goal associated with loss. So you're certified in perinatal mental health. What exactly is that?
That is a great question. So the perinatal mental health certification is through an amazing organization called Postpartum Support International, which does offer resources across the globe to pregnant women, to pregnant people, to couples trying to conceive. And that term perinatal means anything covering the spectrum of trying to conceive, going through pregnancy and up through a year postpartum. So as you can imagine, that encompasses so much of what we are seeing with our intended parents and our surrogates, and how the emotions that come up, the losses that may happen during that time span can really impact them. And the certification is focused on making sure people are equipped to help those people going through the perinatal period through unexpected losses, through mental health challenges, and to make sure that they can support their well-being through that process.
And with the certification and your training in particular surrounding pregnancy, loss, and grief, you absolutely get to apply this to the unique experiences of both intended parents and surrogates, because in a perinatal loss, outside of this surrogacy journey, this is typically an event that is grieved very privately, and it's between an individual and perhaps a partner. But in a surrogacy journey, you've got it is third-party reproduction, so you have third parties involved. You have intended parents, you have surrogates, you have the greater professional team around these individuals. So give us some examples of how you can apply your training to these unique experiences.
Absolutely. I know that what you mentioned is very true. A pregnancy loss of any kind outside of surrogacy can already feel like an invisible loss in some ways. And that means that the grief surrounding that loss can also feel invisible sometimes, or misunderstood, or disenfranchised in some ways. And so what is so unique about a loss through a surrogacy journey is that it's impacting more people. There are more people involved. And a surrogacy match absolutely is a partnership between a surrogate and intended parents. And they experience these losses and these ups and downs through their journeys together. And so there are lots of ways that we help support them through that. And we'll get into that in more detail, I'm sure, as we continue talking. But when I say loss, and when you say loss as well, I want it to be clear that that can mean a lot of different things. And it can mean a failed embryo transfer. It can mean a chemical pregnancy. It can mean a miscarriage. It could mean a termination for medical reasons, a stillbirth. It could mean any number of those things. And I think it's always important to say, as I've heard so many others talk about, and someone that I know is a big voice on this, Dr. Julie Bendeman, who's an expert in reproductive trauma and grief and loss, she will often say that a loss is a loss. A loss is a loss is a loss. There is no hierarchy of loss, and no one can bring judgment toward how someone is experiencing a loss. And I think that that's important, because if you do say something like, oh, it's just a failed transfer, we can try again, or oh, at least you weren't further along when you had this miscarriage, that really deeply minimizes that experience for those intended parents and for that surrogate who have gone through this and who know how much effort and energy and hope there was in that transfer, in that early pregnancy. So I think it's important to recognize that there are so many ways to feel that sense of loss, and that all of that is valid and important to recognize and to help people through. And so that's where we can come in, is recognizing that, offering support through that, no matter what point in the process that happens for our surrogates and intended parents.
Indeed. A loss can be defined in so many ways, not just as you pointed out, a few moments ago, that, loss comes in many forms: chemical pregnancy, miscarriage, failed transfer, etc. But it's also defined and felt very differently by each individual. And, when it comes to intended parents and surrogates, I think it's really important to remind all of us that they come into the surrogacy journey from different paths and with different expectations and with a different definition of what might be a loss. And I'm going to ask you, what should both surrogates and intended parents know about each other's intentions and experiences prior to embarking on a journey? And, maybe then we can segue into how will they handle a loss? So what's important to know about each other's intentions, first of all?
Yeah, this is so important because, as you know, many intended parents, though not all, right? There are intended parents that come from many different experiences before they arrive at surrogacy. But there are many intended parents who have experienced a lot of loss on their own prior to getting here. And that can sometimes mean that they are feeling more cautious early on in a journey, even if they feel great about their surrogate and their match. There's always hope there. They would not be here pursuing surrogacy if there wasn't hope. But sometimes that hope can be a little bit buried under nervousness, under some anxiety, under the fear of the shoe dropping again, experiencing another loss. And that can come out in a way that may impact how they're relating to their surrogate early on in the process. And so it's important for surrogates to recognize that and to not take that personally. And a little bit of empathy goes a long way there. And most surrogates are extremely empathetic people and really do understand that my intended parents may not be experiencing this exactly the same way I am. They may not be quite as excited about this specific milestone as I am, because I can recognize that they are cautious right now. They are protecting their hearts in a way. And for intended parents, I think it's important to recognize that their surrogate is obviously here for the right reasons and wants so badly to help them, and that she will feel some of what they're feeling through the process. And that means that if there is some kind of loss that they experience together, they're all going to grieve that. And open communication goes a long, long way with helping everyone navigate that, should any unexpected circumstances or losses arise.
This is an important topic. The fact that many, not all, but many intended parents remain optimistic, which is why they embark on a surrogacy journey. But it is after a history that has been punctuated again and again by loss, disappointment, setback, and that naturally can translate into fear. And it can also impact their emotional availability to the surrogate and the relationship, at least in the early days, as they're still, as you say, waiting for that other shoe to drop. So how do you help them? How do you help intended parents maybe let down a little bit of the armor, or at least acknowledge that they, are coming with a little less emotional availability than the surrogate has in the moment? Tell us a little bit more about that work that you do.
Absolutely. I think it's often really helpful for intended parents to know that the way they're feeling and that having their guard up is something that we see a lot, that they're not alone in that, and that it's normal to feel nervous. I think normalizing someone's experience and how they're feeling goes a long way in helping them acknowledge that, yes, I am feeling this way. I am, of course, still hopeful. Those two things can coexist. I can be really scared about what's to come, and I also can be really hopeful about what's to come. And we encourage open communication across the board. I think that's one of the best ways for surrogates and intended parents to build the trust between each other. And in an example of where, there perhaps is a failed embryo transfer. That can be really, really difficult for both a surrogate and intended parents. And for a surrogate to communicate openly with her intended parents after the fact, and for intended parents to do the same, can really help everyone move through that experience together in a way that increases the trust and that helps build their relationship and maintain it so that they can keep moving forward. Sometimes it's hard to know what to say. And I think that's the case in a lot of experiences of loss. People may want to help someone feel better. They may want to help someone fix it. But loss and the grief around a loss is not a problem to be solved. It's not something that has an easy solution. It can't be fixed. The best way through it is through it and by acknowledging it. And so I will often encourage surrogates to reach out to their intended parents and let them know, I'm thinking of you. I'm not sure what to say, but I'm so sorry and I'm heartbroken for you. I'm heartbroken too. And I'm thinking of you, and I recognize that you may need a little space, and that's okay. Kind of putting that out there, that they recognize that we're all grieving, that the intended parents are going to need probably some space to grieve that loss. And I think it's important on the flip side for intended parents to be open about what they need and to communicate that directly. And they could simply say something like, I am so sad about this. I'm going to need some space to grieve this. We don't blame you. We know that this was not your fault. And they can reassure the surrogate in that way that they are still hopeful. They still want to move forward, but they need some time. And I think communicating that openly helps everyone take a breath and feel a little bit more at ease so that they can focus on the grieving that they need to do before trying to move forward again.
Kristy, this training that you bring is so important just for these very reasons that you outline, because even though everybody comes with best intentions and even perhaps the language that demonstrates they know that there's been loss on the other side and on behalf of intended parents, surrogates by their very nature are coming into a surrogacy program having had nothing but positive obstetrical and, perinatal experiences, right? That's what qualifies them to be a surrogate. So, it's very hard for them to be able to perhaps empathize with the level of loss that intended parents have experienced. They might be able to acknowledge it, sympathize with it, but empathizing with something to that degree is going to be more difficult for them. So having a facilitator and a trained expert such as you being able to help them navigate these conversations with one another is paramount to a successful surrogacy journey, even during the thornier moments of loss, right? The more negative experiences that, sometimes come along with this process. And also, more importantly, to help the surrogate and reassure her that it's not her fault. It's not, quote unquote, her. The intended parent response to her is not to be taken personally. It's just perhaps one of many losses that they have experienced, and they're vulnerable, right? So I just think that the kind of work that you are deploying in these scenarios is key to the ultimate level of success that each party feels through surrogacy. How can you, Kristy, help intended parents navigate these feelings of fear or worry? Like what conversations might you have with them, or how do you address certain topics that come up that come from a very real place of fear?
It often is unique to each intended parent. And again, depending on what they've been through, on what their perspective is going through their journey, there can be lots of ways that we can help them think about all the supports that they already have in place and deploy those and utilize those and focus on self-care. One of the biggest things that we hear from intended parents is how hard it is to have this lack of control over so many aspects of the journey. And that makes a lot of sense. And the things that are in their control are how they take care of themselves, how they navigate the important relationships they already have in their life, how they, again, utilize self-care techniques to make sure that they're taking the best care of themselves that they can. Even their physical health, taking good care of themselves physically is going to help them feel better and stronger mentally. So employing those things and encouraging them to utilize their own support system, the things that are within their control, can often be really helpful with just making sure that they have that space where they're grounded through the process. And then also encouraging them to focus on their relationship with their surrogate, on having that open communication with her, connecting with her. And when things are going smoothly, those are such good opportunities for intended parents and surrogates to build those connections. And that can help intended parents feel like the process is real, like the pregnancy is real, that this is really happening. And all of those things will help them navigate even difficult circumstances that come up.
How about when something isn't going as planned? Perhaps it's not quite going to be something that we might identify or define as a loss per se, but we see something ahead, right? We know that it's not quite going as everybody planned, and there could be a loss associated with what's ahead. What's the best way to approach that kind of scenario, or I guess we could say get ahead of it, right? To address a loss that could be coming down the pike. Do you have anything that you might work on in terms of getting ahead of an issue when it's not going as planned?
Right. I think one of the best things to do in circumstances like that are to help our surrogates and intended parents have other outlets for support, especially when things could potentially become more challenging. And sometimes having a safe space, someone they can talk to, and that could be a member of our mental health team. It could be someone who is a therapist, and we might help make a referral for them to have that safe outlet outside of ConceiveAbilities. It could be a support group, a group of people who have had similar experiences and who know what this is like. Those can feel like safe spaces to express the emotions that are coming up, the fears that are coming up, and for those to be validated. And it's so helpful to know that you're not alone in this process. And that, I think, is one of the biggest goals that we have at ConceiveAbilities. No matter what is happening in a match and what surrogates and intended parents are experiencing, we never want them to feel isolated in that and to feel alone in that. And so we wrap our arms around them, figuratively and literally, with the support we can offer from our mental health team, from support groups that we have in place, referring them to external supports that are out there. And even our match managers, our other staff, are helping sift through all the logistics and the information that's coming with perhaps every appointment and every milestone to make sure that they are not alone in that.
So, you're offering listeners an incredible and necessary amount of insight into how we manage these issues as they arise. And, in a surrogacy journey, because surrogacy is so complex, complicated, convoluted, lots of moving pieces and parts, administratively, medically, legally, emotionally. I mean, there could be loss at every turn across the board, not just when it relates to pregnancy, right? Administratively, we could have a loss. So there is a lot of complexity here to tackle in the realm of loss. And so, when you are, describing to our listeners how we wrap our arms around issues as they arise, I think I just want to underscore that, because we have such a multidisciplinary team of professionals employed for the multifaceted complexity of surrogacy. So we are trained, you are trained to pivot, to identify loss, to acknowledge it, and to help navigate all the participants through this process. I mean, it really is unparalleled in the field. And I know I'm going to just sort of toot our horn for a moment by underscoring that. But what's most important is that if somebody is listening to this, either as a potential intended parent or surrogate, and they're asking themselves, how could this program help me when things don't go right? Your professional expertise and your training is one of the hallmarks of how we do that best, right? We get in there, we become surgical in how to address the issue, and you bring your training to bear in the moment. But when it comes to the multidisciplinary team of professionals, you kind of hinted at it a moment when we've got these match managers, we've got a team, but maybe add a little bit more color, Kristy. How would you describe to a listener really the different facets of our team members and what they do in these moments?
Absolutely. We have such, as you said, a multidisciplinary team. Everyone plays a critical role in this process, and different staff members are involved at different times and in different ways with all of our matches. And I think that's important to share for people on the outside who maybe don't recognize that. This is not a one-man show, right? We have people who can help and who have expertise in all different areas, and it really is an all hands on deck attitude when there is the potential for something difficult coming up in a match, if there's the potential for loss, if there is a loss. Our surrogates and intended parents can rest assured that they will have support around every aspect of that. And again, from all sides, we're going to be here to support them emotionally, logistically. We're going to help them navigate the appointments that may be coming, the financial aspects of things, the legal side of things, and all of our staff members work so well together, it's amazing, and it's really a great team to be part of. But we all work together to make sure that our clients are supported in every way.
I imagine for surrogates, it's when I mention that this is, by their very nature, they have not experienced loss when it comes to obstetrics. So for many, if they do experience a loss in the surrogacy journey, this is the first time that they're experienced something at this level. That's related
true.
to pregnancy.
Yeah,
And,
it can be.
How do the feelings of failure or self-blame after pregnancy loss manifest in surrogates, and how do we help them process these emotions?
Yes, those thoughts and feelings that are ultimately very common with the experience of one's own pregnancy loss, which you're right, as you're saying, the vast majority of surrogates have not had that experience personally. And so if they experience that as a surrogate, some of those same thoughts and sentiments are still there. They may have thoughts around how their body failed them. They may think, what did I do wrong? Or could I have done something differently that would have led to a different outcome? And I think where the difference is that there can be this worry, even if they know that it's not logical. There is a worry sometimes that they may be blamed, that maybe their intended parents feel like they, the surrogate, have let them down. And I think one of the most reassuring things is that across the board, we hear from clinics, we hear from doctors, they reassure the surrogate, this was not your fault. This, there was nothing we could have done to prevent this. Sometimes we don't know why these losses happen, and we don't have a clear reason for that. And sometimes that can be helpful to hear. It can also be really hard to hear. I think people want a reason. They want to know why, so that they can, for the next try, do something differently, again, that's going to lead to a different outcome. And so I think going through that experience really highlights the lack of control that everyone feels through this process. And it's, I think, a blessing and a curse to know that there's so much out of our control, because that does mean that the things we can control, we can do our best, right? The surrogate can take all of her medications exactly as prescribed. She can take the best care of herself, and it's not her fault if something doesn't continue, if there is a loss. And intended parents know that often very well, and maybe more so than their surrogates. And so coming together through that and reassuring everyone that this happened, we weren't expecting this, we didn't want this is heartbreaking, but there's no blame there. I think that's one of the most helpful things for surrogates to hear. And also, if that happens to a surrogate and that's her first experience of loss, we again can help her through that and help her know that she's not alone. There have been other surrogates who've been through that exact same thing and have felt the exact same feelings, and they have gotten through it. It's not easy, and it's important to allow the space to grieve, and it will often hit hard. Surrogates will talk about how it hits them harder than expected because this wasn't their baby. And this wasn't their hoped-for child, but they have that hope for their intended parents. And so they are often grieving for and alongside their intended parents. So normalizing all of that, letting them know they're not alone, I think those are the ways that we try to wrap our arms around our surrogates as they keep moving forward.
So I'm hearing, Kristy, like some themes emerging, like the most... Like, you can't solve for grief. You can't fix grief. The solution to grief is to move through it. So moving through grief is a theme that's universal, whether it's surrogacy or otherwise. I just heard you talk about normalizing grief, another key theme, and the importance of normalizing it in the surrogacy process so that, both intended parents and surrogates can work through emotions. What other main theme would you say is really important for, perinatal loss associated with the surrogacy journey?
I think that similar to perinatal loss in general, so even not in a surrogacy journey, any kind of pregnancy loss can feel invisible. And sometimes as part of the grieving process, different people will find different ways to honor that loss. And that can be a way that helps them move through it and helps them move forward. That the grief doesn't go away. It becomes kind of incorporated into life. And I think that because pregnancy loss can seem invisible in some ways, and maybe the intended parents hadn't shared about their journey yet or about their pregnancy yet with others. And so they're experiencing this in a way that feels lonely. And surrogates maybe had not shared this with other people, but they're experiencing it together. So connecting together through that can be really helpful. And there are lots of ways to honor pregnancy loss. And I think in general, when we think about grieving death in our society, you think about a funeral, you think about a memorial service. People send flowers, people send cards, and you're often reflecting back on that lost loved one's life. And so in pregnancy loss, it differs in that you are grieving the loss of what you had hoped for. You're grieving that hoped for child, hoped for experiences, and sometimes a due date that you thought would be coming can be a really difficult milestone. And there are lots of ways to honor that, from lighting a candle on certain dates of the year in remembrance of that loss, to having artwork on your wall that you can look at to remember that loss. Maybe you name that embryo or had a nickname for that embryo, or you named that baby if the loss was later in the process. A blanket. Again, there are lots of different ways, planting trees to honor a loss that may otherwise feel invisible. And surrogates sometimes might even get a necklace or a bracelet, something that helps them memorialize that loss too. And so it's honoring that part of their story rather than shoving it aside, not thinking about it, because it is a part of everyone's story there.
How about the role of the relationship between the surrogate and intended parents? Does the relationship play a role in helping both sides cope with grief and loss during the journey?
Yes, 100%. I think I often view the relationship between the surrogate and intended parents as that connecting point, that helps the intended parents feel connected to this pregnancy that they are not physically carrying. Their relationship with their surrogate is their line to that pregnancy, their direct line there. She is often sharing updates and helping them feel involved at appointments. There's so much that's shared there. And sometimes intended parents and surrogates will utilize things later on in their journeys, like belly buds, where the intended parents can have their voices be heard by the baby in utero, or bond touch bracelets where the surrogate can tap it and intended parents will feel their own bracelet vibrate when the baby is moving. Those are ways that across this distance between a surrogate and intended parents, they can help that connection grow and flourish as the pregnancy continues. And so even those kinds of things, if you think about a loss that may happen even later on, which is so heartbreaking, intended parents may have those memories of the pregnancy to reflect back on as they're grieving. And those, again, if they're moving forward together and trying again, those methods of connecting can be reassuring and emotionally so valuable as everyone keeps moving forward. So there are lots of ways, I think, that the relationship and the involvement that happens back and forth during the process helps everyone feel connected to each other and to the pregnancy.
So the relationship, even the best relationships, under the best, the best of circumstances, the best relationships, communication can become strained. And then I can imagine, layering on the best of relationships, having a strained moment, perhaps even a loss. And then relationships that maybe aren't so strong, and then you layer on, a loss or a tragic event. So the communication can become strained across the spectrum of the health of a relationship. So how do you continue to encourage and work with intended parents and surrogates to maintain open communication regardless of the circumstances, to make sure that they're having it, you're fostering it between the two of them so that they can navigate these difficult experiences?
There are lots of ways that can look, and sometimes we may encourage intended parents and surrogates to have, if maybe communication is feeling strained, if it's not happening naturally at a cadence that they are all comfortable with, we can encourage maybe a set time each week that they can reach out and check in on one another or share updates. Usually at doctor's appointments, those are times when we are encouraging involvement and communication around what's happening at the appointments, what updates need to be shared with all parties. And our staff can also help with this. Sometimes we may be involved in that communication to help make sure that, it's going smoothly, that it's comfortable for everyone. And it's okay for there to be boundaries in place. I think, again, knowing that this is such an emotional experience, especially for intended parents and also often for surrogates, it's really important to remember that the intended parents are not responsible for managing their surrogate's emotions. And the surrogate is not responsible for managing her intended parent's emotions. There, of course, will be lots of things that they're sharing with each other, but it's just as in, I think, any relationship, it's important to have those safe and supportive outlets outside of the relationship that help everyone bring their best selves to the relationship. And so that may be each party's respective support systems. It may be staff at our agency that can help with that so that they can communicate respectfully with each other and that the needed information is shared, even if things are strained in the meantime. And that will help continue to build trust and hopefully help repair and mend that relationship moving forward.
Are there any key factors that help surrogates and intended parents continue working together after experiencing a loss? And, maybe even sharing an example of, a match that moved forward after such a loss?
Yes, I really think open communication is key, as well as empathy, understanding, and having that external support, having strong support systems on both sides. Those are all key factors that can help a match keep moving forward through experiences of loss. And I can think of 2 matches off the top of my head where each had somewhat similar circumstances, where these were matches that experienced a failed transfer and also a miscarriage before their 3rd transfer together ended up being successful and leading to a viable full-term pregnancy and healthy delivery. And as you can imagine, a first failed transfer and then followed by a miscarriage, maintaining hope and maintaining a relationship through all of that would have been really, really difficult. But the relationship they developed leading up to those transfers and through those losses, which again were absolutely built on open communication, shared hope, and shared priorities for continuing to move forward together, allowed them to stick with this and to stick with each other. And one of the things that I know is helpful in matches like that, again, is keeping those lines of communication open even immediately after the experience of loss, because that helps everyone feel that, even though we have some hard work to do and a lot of grieving to do here, I know that my intended parents are still in this with me, and they know that I'm still in this with them, so that it relieves any fear there that one side is going to back out or not be willing to move forward. And then the grieving can happen as they continue to move forward together.
And I would be remiss if I didn't also share with our listeners that, you are an experienced surrogate yourself. You have gone through more than one surrogacy journey. You've had a great relationship with your intended parent. No doubt there were moments where you experienced your own setbacks or, various forms of loss along the way. So how do you bring your personal experience and perspective to your work?
I think it's really important to me to share with our surrogates that I have been in your shoes and I've been through this process. I understand how unique these relationships are between intended parents and surrogates, and I can speak to how helpful that open communication can be. Even things like, proactively talking with your intended parents about, what if something unexpected happens? How do you want me to communicate that with you? And also asking things like, do you want to get bump pictures? Is that something that you're comfortable with? Or are there certain milestones in this process that might be harder for you? Again, asking for what each other need through the process can be really comforting and really helpful. So I can bring that perspective to our surrogates. And I think with intended parents, I learned so much from my own intended parents and every intended parent I've worked with over the span of the last few years. I learn from them and from their experiences and understand that their journeys are unique. The feelings they have through their journeys are unique. And I can share what I've learned with them. And again, helping them know that they're not alone through this process. And I think sometimes intended parents are comforted by the fact that I can also speak directly to the surrogate's perspective, and they value that perspective too, even though I have not been in an intended parent's shoes, and I will always be clear about that. But I want everyone to have that support through the process.
What's the most rewarding part of helping build families? You have to guide them through challenging and joyous times, but also sometimes through loss, right? So do you find rewarding moments during those times? But overall, what's the best that you get out of facilitating surrogacy journeys?
I love what I get to do, and building relationships is a big part of it. And so having the relationships with a surrogate, with intended parents, to help them navigate unexpected circumstances, it helps. And I know I've read this somewhere, but there's a quote it says something along the lines of, the best gift we can give someone who is grieving is our presence. And in my role and many others at ConceiveAbilities, we get to sit with our clients through ups and downs, through heartbreak and successes in their journeys, and be there for them. And that in and of itself is so meaningful. And I think I often will find myself sharing with people and also telling myself that grief and joy, grief and hope, those things can coexist. And this journey can be really hard, and it can also be really beautiful. Both of those things can be true. And it's always worth it. I truly believe that this journey is always worth it.
I love that, Kristy. Thank you for saying that. And you're so right. You can, at the same time, hold great joy and grief simultaneously. And, I think whether it's surrogacy or other parts of our lives that are equally as important, we all have had to move through grief, loss, and joy, and sometimes it's simultaneously. So thank you for those words of wisdom.
Thank you.
And I really, really enjoyed this time with you and sharing your personal and professional experience of surrogacy, what you bring to bear, and how you help intended parents and surrogates alike through one of the most impactful and momentous experiences of their lives. Thank you for everything that you do, Kristy.
Thank you so much, Nazca.
Goodness, Kristy imparted so much wisdom about how best to move through loss and grief. I had so many aha moments in talking to her, but I think one of the pieces of advice that stood out the most to me and really resonated perhaps with my own personal experience in life is that there is no solution to grief. And the way to get beyond it is to actually move through it. So if you are listening and you are experiencing loss or grief, just stay the course, my friend, and this too shall pass. And until next time, take good care.
At ConceiveAbilities, we believe that everyone who wants to become a parent can. Our agency has helped build thousands of families for nearly 25 years. Whether you are an intended parent ready to fulfill your family destiny, a surrogate answering your calling, or an egg donor wanting to expand what's possible in your life, we are your people. See how matching matters. Learn more by joining our Surrogacy Learning Center community at surrogacylearningcenter.conceivabilities.com.